Okay, Brendan, if you would see who's here.
Sure. Morning. First, I know Cheryl's here. Good morning.
Morning.
Dinesh from AT&T. You're here. Morning. Okay. Matt from Amazon.
Morning.
Matt C. Matt. Other Matt C. Mark Hess from Comcast. Bob Klein from Cablevision. Adam Goldberg from Public Knowledge. Brad Love. Welcome back to the States. Ken Lowe from Vizio. Bruce McClellan from Eris. John Card from Dish. We've got John McCoskey from MPAA. We've got Milo Medine from Google. We've got John Godfrey from Samsung. We've got Jay Rolls from Charter. Brent Smith from Evolution. Joe Weber from TiVo. Robin Wilson from Nagra. And Simha Sethimanabhan from Columbia. Do we have Brant on the phone?
Yeah, hi, good morning.
Perfect. And I believe that means that everyone is represented. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Okay. For the last couple of weeks, the two DSTAC committees have been working on an outline for the final report due to Congress in September. And we'll have a discussion of those two outlines this morning. Who wants to start? I think we were starting with Working Group 3. Adam, take it away.
Okay, there we go. Working Group 3 had 3 meetings between the last meeting and this, and spent a fair bit of time, developing an outline, which is a bit of includes a sort of common framework for describing what we think are some common features of what a downloadable security system would be. These are sort of things like describing, the interface between components and compliance rules and robustness rules, and things like that. We actually have a list that goes, through the fair way through the alphabet on, on sort of common features that we think, any system that we would evaluate for whether it's it would work for our situation should have, and some other things around it like performance objectives and stuff. We also have a section for a description of the threat model, which is sort of an important part of evaluating security systems. The idea is to describe things like what sort of attacker does the security system need to be reasonably effective in deterring, and some things around that. And then what we expect is there would be a discussion of various alternatives that could possibly meet the sorts of requirements that we have for this sort of system, and for each of them sort of describe the capabilities and the system requirements and what sort of platform they run on or need to run on, and then some collection of features to describe about the system, including things like how the software is securely downloaded to the device, and what sorts of platform it runs on, how the how the trust model works and keying and things like serial numbers and whatever differences there are for against the common requirements, things like how is the hardware robustness different if it is, and things like that. And so after the sort of analysis of a description of each of the systems, to have a discussion around we're not entirely sure about how the analysis might proceed, but there's been at least one mechanism, one sort of process to describe an analysis of the systems in terms of security and effectiveness against our requirements, and then sort of the standard conclusions and stuff. I think what the outline has is here's a number of things that we think are important for a downloadable security solution, and here's some alternatives that may work in that case, and then some analysis of how that is or isn't true for each of them, and then some conclusion. I'm not sure what the conclusions might be. It's hard to prejudge at this point. I think we have discussed, at least Bruce and I have discussed ways moving forward to get to a draft, and I'm not sure whether we want to talk about that now or later. Bruce, do you want to add anything to all that?
Yeah, just to maybe just kind of repeat for a second. So I think the way we structured the document, there's three main sections in the document. The first section is around a common framework where we get into the requirements and the definition of a downloadable software security system. As part of that, there's a section that describes existing systems that may be applicable to what we're looking for. So I think, in the short term, spending some time on that and not reinventing the wheel, but spending time looking at what are some of the existing solutions that may apply to what we're looking for. And we think, that kind of helps us frame out the rest of that requirements section, again, rather than kind of reinventing the wheel, trying to make use of what's available already today from a requirements perspective, and then get into the threat models that we're trying to solve for, what's in scope and what's out of scope, what we're trying to solve for and what we're not, and then the section on what are the proposed alternatives, from a framework perspective that would meet those requirements. So. And then, as Adam said, the next step is what's the process we go through over the next month or so as we start to fill out this section. And I think we'll want to spend some time in our breakout later today to talk about that.
Are there any reactions to the outline, particularly from Working Group 4? This might be a short meeting. Well, do you want to talk about how you want to go forward with this?
Yeah, I guess so. So the first step is spending a little time looking at existing security systems. Of course, we need to put a list of those together, and we've just started to circulate some ideas around what that list might look like, and still need some feedback from the working group and anybody else on the committee, I guess, that would have some ideas on existing security systems for us to evaluate or to understand better. We're thinking that the best way to get through this would probably be a face-to-face meeting, if we can get that on the calendar in the next, say, 3 weeks or something like that.
For the working group? For
the working group, and invite in the specialists that we need to have to give us an overview of those existing systems. Kind of throw that out for comment, I guess, to the rest of the working group, the rest of the committee.
Who are you thinking about for specialists that you would rely on?
Well, we put a list together of existing DRM solutions, which certainly are in this space, as well as existing systems in deployment that have a downloadable nature to them. So there's a variety of different potential alternatives there. So. And
Yeah,
we
I
could-
mean, there's at least a handful of commercial solutions that are, could be called downloadable security, that I'm sure have some, some details about what they can do, what they run on, and things like that we would sort of like to hear what are alternatives to choose from. I think what's either somewhere between impossible and not going to happen is the opportunity for Working Group 3 to somehow define a new system. The best we can do, the best we should do, no matter our time, I think, but certainly within the time frame of our work, is to look at what exists and have a discussion about which of those seems to do what needs to be done. In our opinion, I don't think we can set off on a multi-year effort to describe something from scratch at all. So that would be the sort of experts, is somebody to tell us about their product or this thing they're aware of or what have you, so that we can sort of have enough information about them to fill in the analysis on that
Right.
on that system.
So I assume there's consensus on that point.
Yeah, we haven't been lacking consensus in Working Group 3 yet.
So far, so good.
Good.
Again, we're not trying
Music
to
to my-
pick something here. We're really
I
trying to
understand.
learn from the existing systems and then help that frame out what the requirements for, a new system would look like, I guess, if you will. So.
Okay. Milo?
So, two questions. I noticed in the requirement spec there wasn't an express section about evolvability. And I think one of the questions is how we move from one DCAS function to a new one. And if it's done properly, it should also create a transition path from existing CAs, right? Because you're going to have to be able to operate concurrent CAs during any kind of transition. And if that's implemented properly, it should accommodate a transition from the existing systems.
So there is a discussion in the outline in the portion that talks about the secure downloader as sort of how to react to the system failures and recover from them. Robin might have a word to say about this, but I think that the primary way to recover from it's all broken is to download a new system, and so that's fundamentally the feature of the downloader. Robin, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well, you sort of inadvertently reminded me of one other area which is we've touched on, which is simulcrypt, key sharing, whatever you want to call it. It's sort of a higher level and simpler way of dealing with replacement while in progress. What I think is not commonly realized is a lot of the commercial CA systems out there simulcrypt with themselves transparently to the user because they are replacing themselves. I mean, we've done that on many deployments. It's transparent to the user. It's a little more challenging with what we're trying to do because we're trying to keep the same devices in play, fielded during all of these transitions. In some cases, with simulcrypt or key sharing or using the same cipher, the older devices are obsoleted over time. Now that's an option, but we don't want to go down that road if we don't have to. So I think you've inadvertently, perhaps, we need to talk about the different levels of survivability, to invent another term, which is probably what we're really looking at, making sure we don't obsolete things in the field, because that's a very costly issue.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I brought up what the nature of the transition has to be. You're going to have to operate multiple CAs in any kind of practical deployment and evolution. Obviously, crypto that's strong today becomes subject to attack, at some point in the future as Moore's law continues to progress. So we need to have the ability to evolve these systems. And so I think it would be nice if that was just expressly sort of covered.
And I think we know at least one of the MVPDs here has done a pretty good job at doing that. So we should definitely look at all that work.
The second question I had was on regarding IPR. So I think one of the challenges in all the standard spaces are dealing with IPR and licensing of patents, et cetera. And one of the criteria should be trying to make that process as minimalist and less onerous as possible. I don't know if you've investigated licensing pools or other vehicles for dealing with this, but as we get into this, we don't want to inadvertently select a standard or set of standards that gives power to particular patent holders for key IPR unless it's available on a reasonable brand basis.
So one of the sections in there I should have mentioned is on specifications as well. What are existing specifications in the industry that are applicable in this area, and kind of an analysis of that. So,
okay,
I completely agree.
Thanks.
John?
John Card from Dish. So actually, Milo, if you look at towards the end of the outline, section 4, I was asked to provide some DBS-centric comments into it. So we actually suggested that some of the time of Work Group 3 ought to be spent on looking at the renewability of the system itself. You obviously have pointed out that there's also the initial implementation, which is maybe the first scenario for that. So I just wanted to call your attention to that because I'm happy to see Work Group 3 agreed that was a worthwhile concept to bring in.
I'm sort of curious if staff has any advice on the IP aspect of this. I think that my impression is it's real easy to step into the muck, past your hip if you spend too much time trying to figure out the IP aspects of things. And I wonder if there's any advice from staff on how to or how not to deal with that sort of problem.
So we've tossed around the idea of another working group to kind of deal with any IP licensing issues. That would happen later, I think. Obviously, with the DFAS license, it kind of helped create that continuity of licensing, I think perhaps we could address some of John's issues with John McCoskey's, not John Carr, issue of having some licensing attaching from the content owners to the device manufacturers in some way. But I think that's probably a future issue for now.
Well, I guess that's a different issue than what I was trying to ask about.
Okay.
I think the sort of interlocking licenses that you might end up with in order to guarantee that a device, for example, complies and is compliant and robust, is sort of different from what I think was being asked about, which was simply patents that read on whatever standard, whatever system the commission eventually adopts, and investigating. I don't know what either looking into what patents do read on this sort of thing, or maybe requiring that whatever we seriously consider be submitted to a standards body that has RAND obligation. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to ask about.
That would be great. I know that was something that came out of Working Group 1, if I recall, that, it was a requirement of the CE manufacturers. They suggested that, FRAND is a really important part of this. I'm no patent law expert, but from what little I know, this is a really difficult issue that a patent could pop up after the fact that we didn't know about. I know with the ATSC standard, we've said that things should be available on a RAND standard. But all I can say is that it's a good issue to think about, but it's a really difficult thing, and I don't think we have a answer, and I don't know that we will. Sorry, that's not particularly helpful. I would encourage you, if you can, find a group of solutions or a standard that is available on FRAND licensing.
There is a tricky point here, which is it's not just patents, it's intellectual property or, plausibly intellectual property or copyright, and that is one of the current issues. So we have to be aware it's not just patents.
It's beyond that. It's the commercial arrangement around the liability associated with content protection, and somewhere along the way that'll be good discussion to get into.
Joe Weber at TiVo. So if I understand and clarify, it is then recommended that within that working group, we at least put something on each of the systems we look at, what is the business or contractual arrangements that's known. We certainly will not go into the patents, but we would say this has a public license that's available here. This is only available from one vendor, which has no obligations to license. Just noting what's public, right? I assume that's what we're looking at.
I don't know if we have that called out specifically. We'll have to talk about it.
I certainly would recommend that we would, I guess, if it's not explicit.
Anybody else? I have one quick question. Can you explain Roman 5, the blue-red analysis, what that is?
Maybe Simha should describe that. There's a, correct me where I get this wrong. There's a sort of a paradigm for analyzing a security solution where you say, this set of people design it or propose it or something, and this different set of people try to poke holes in it. And so one of the suggestions for how we could evaluate systems is to do sort of a red-blue analysis on this, where some folks for some systems sort of describe how they work and what they do, and a different set of folks try to poke holes at it. Did I get that right, Simha?
Yeah, I think that's a very good description. So this is a standard methodology that's followed for evaluation of security products. Sorry. I was saying that this is a fairly standard methodology that's used for evaluating security products. And the idea is that, as he mentioned, there is a proposal, and the proposal is by the blue team, and the red team attacks that particular system. And it's all done in a fairly friendly manner. And the eventual goal is to get even more robust security systems. The idea was that there was not going to be a set red team and a blue team. It's just that we would rotate over the different presentations and the proposals that were presented during the course of the working group.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on the outline for Working Group 3? Good work.
Thank you.
Lots to do.
Yes.
You're making good progress. Okay, Working Group 4, Mr. Card, I think you're up.
Sure. John Card from DISH. I'm one of the co-editors. Cheryl, I wanted to confirm something that I may have misheard that you started our conversation with. Did I hear you say that you thought that each working group was working on an outline for the final report? That's not clear at all to me and to Work Group 4 from our guidance. We were asked to provide an outline of our work as Work Group 4. We honestly have not talked about an outline for the final report at all.
Oh, it's for your final, okay.
So it's what we have, and I think what Work Group 3 is got is the outline for our individual work groups.
Right, okay.
Okay, good.
My mistake.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So that's what we have, is our outline in the state it's in right now. It's been shared with Workgroup 3 members as well. We've had some folks who've been in as observers. We did have one comment coming from TiVo, which gets in kind of the next level of detail. It sounds like Joe Weber is going to be able to provide kind of the next level of detail where we have a place in our outline for him. The title and the subject matter is pretty much going to be up to each of the device describers or the subject area describers. So, Joe, I don't see at this point we need to change the words in the outline. What you talked about describing in your email, in your response back to us, sounds great. That's exactly what I think we're looking for. So if you'd like us to, we can change the word on the outline, but we're not. We don't think we need to at this point. Let us know, or maybe answer now.
To clarify, you're asking the single line change I had requested for the heading of that subsection.
Right.
Yes. Again, I would still recommend that we do change it
Okay.
to be more accurate.
All right. Well, we'll bring that in. Our next call is next Monday. I imagine we've been accepting pretty much all the changes that come in. It makes perfect sense. So thanks for that input.
Where is that?
Oh, so I'm sorry. Now, in our outline, to turn to that, and I'll call out where I believe Joe's suggestion fits. Before Workgroup 4 met, Brent Kendall of Sony and Brant, hi, you're on the phone. Please speak up when I misstate something, as well as other Workgroup 4 members. We exchanged back and forth a couple different drafts of an initial outline, and then started our first Workgroup 4 call with an outline, which is substantially what's presented to the DSTAC right now. It is divided into 3 parts, which follow kind of in paragraph form the guidance we were given. It looks as though the parts that we're going to be analyzing follow nicely on a timeline. In other words, we probably won't get to Part 2 until Part 1 is mostly done, and we almost certainly won't be able to complete Part 3 until Parts 1 and 2 are complete. In other words, our identification of alternative systems, we're going to need to understand the various parts that make up those alternative systems and the various options we have to pick from. There may, in fact, be an alternative system someone could propose today, but we're not going to be ready to analyze it until we understand kind of all the parameters we're looking at, the salient features that we've been asked to identify for the non-security aspects of these devices and services. In our outline, then, the Part 1, we are looking at the salient differences important to the implementation of the non-security elements of a system. Those parts of the system certainly include devices, network technologies, different use cases, different modes of operation that a subscriber to an MVPD service would have. There's things they want to do or parts of the service they want to interact with. Then the individual technologies, the functions of the technologies as they apply to those use cases. Then as we are going along, I expect we're going to come across a number of protocols, and we have a section in our outline right now which is truly a laundry list of protocols as we run across them. It may turn into a simple reference, which may be directly importable into the final report. We may get into a little bit more detail where is necessary to talk about a particular technology or a standard or a protocol in greater depth or in greater detail. If we can't just point at a standard or point at an RFC and say, go read that, we may be using something in a strange way, or an MVPD or over-the-top service may be implementing things in a particular way that is going to be important to call out. We have a section listing over-the-top services, and again, today it is just a list of over-the-top services. By the time Working Group 4 gets to its analysis of those, my expectation, and it sounds like general idea in the working group, is we'll create buckets that group similar over-the-top services. There are many, many of them, and it is likely that several of them share common attributes that are of interest to Workgroup 4 in its charge, and we may be able to talk about a group of services A, group of services B, et cetera. So for now, there's a list that is 12 items long and likely to grow, but the final report Workgroup 4's final report is likely to have that sectioned out, much as we've started to do in the first in Roman numeral 1. We've got a section talking about essential customer experiences, and this gets into kind of the details of the use cases. At a high level, customer wants to watch TV. That's a very simple use case. But in fact, what's going on behind the scenes and what's going to be the non-security aspects of that device manufacturers kind of already know about and that service providers already know about, we think we need to maybe lay them out and very, very clearly describe. There's always some kind of a session initialization. Something has to start up, a connection, or a filter has to be set up, etc. So the various necessary essential customer experiences are here. Again, we are that part of the outline is continuing to grow a little bit. By the time we get there, I think we may be able to either group or trim out some of these. And then finally, in part one, we will hopefully come up with the actual list of differences. What are the important differences to list? Again, the list A through G that is present in the outline today is our starting point. Our final list of differences may not be organized this way at all. This was, before we have any conversation, a way to organize differences, and there may be other natural ways that fall out of this, maybe based on architecture or type of user experience instead, or again, we'll discover this as we go. Part two of the outline then talks about the kinds of systems and the characteristics of systems that, other than security elements, that enable competitive availability of devices. And again, we are going to be looking at protocols. This is where we may get into some of the details from the list of protocols above, implementation details, or a discussion of, for most cable systems, the following protocols are important, but for other cable systems, another group of protocols. We have a place here then also if there are particular systems that we can point at and describe. And one example that was brought in by Sony is SAT-IP, which some on the committee are becoming more familiar with. That may or may not enable some of the competitive aspects. Cable card may also, for example, come in as a system that we describe. Workgroup 2 did a fairly in-depth examination of cable cards, so we may just simply refer to their analysis of cable card and say that's one of the systems that we learned from and be done with it. Lastly, then, in part 3 is where we are tasked to identify alternative systems, kind of in the two major categories. One where there are competitive consumer electronics retail devices, and then the second where the MVPD is controlling the user interface. It's possible that we may discover there's a third category. There may be some hybrid systems. I don't know. Brant and I have talked about this a little bit, and I've had some brief conversation with other work group members. If we can identify a compromise, let's say, or combined systems, we will absolutely do so. This may not be an either or, it may be an and kind of a solution. So that's not currently in the outline. If we discover those, it certainly will show up in part 3. And then we also, to address Milo's concern, and I think, Milo, you brought in some of the implementation details and the legacy device implementation. As we propose a system or as we describe systems or identify systems, we need to get from where we are today to some future where there are new things. And that path could be a steep cliff, and nothing built before January 1st, 2020 works, and everything built after January 2nd, 2020 does, or maybe there's better ways or simpler ways to move forwards. We may be able to identify the issues at the very least with moving forwards with the particular systems that are identified earlier on, at least to begin to look at that. And then from John McCoskey, the evaluation of burden, which is in our charge in the statute that set up the group, is we were asked to look at not unduly burdensome, I think is the phrase, which I believe means we ought to be looking at the evaluation of what kind of burden is this system to build, both for an MVPD and a retail manufacturer and the end consumer as well. If everybody has to remember a 20-digit secret code to watch TV, yeah, you're shaking your head. We would all believe that we
Not gonna
failed.
work, yeah.
Except for the guys with the 20-digit secret code rings. So that's the outline that we've developed so far. We are absolutely still in our building stage of the outline. In terms of a work plan to address this, during our last call, we spent some time, I kind of cajoled or asked for volunteers to address different sections in Part 1, to begin to look at Part 1, in part to actually start getting some volunteers to bring some words in and some presentations in, but also to see if we're looking at the right scope. Have we bitten off more than we could chew? Are we going to be looking for experts far and wide, or do we have maybe some expertise already within the DSTAC or in past presenters for Workgroup 2, for example, that we could rely on? The answer seems to be that we are scoped about right in terms of reach of expertise. It appears that we have at least volunteers for all of the parts in Roman numeral 1 and in parts of Roman numeral 2 we are going to rely on Working Group 2's report. Also, the DSTAC members believe we can also point at some internal and outside experts as well. So Joe Weber for TiVo, for example, was on the call. I used his name several times. He picked up on my subtle cues and has provided us with a suggestion how to more easily incorporate the information about what TiVo offers. So as we move through parts 1 and 2, we expect the same kind of process to continue. So much as Workgroup 3 said they're going to be looking at existing security systems to analyze them, to understand what they bring in, we will probably be looking at experts in particular technologies that enable the reception of content. And again, we are, in this area in particular, we're not likely to invent a new encoding system, a new transmission system, or anything like that. We're all going to have to rely on existing standards there. So we believe that we're going to be able to find experts in most of these areas and rely on them for a lot of our input. We also have a fair amount of expertise within Workgroup 4, obviously, today in existing products and systems that are built. So in terms of a test, it was a successful test. We think it is possible we can complete this report with this outline.
That was going to be my question.
Yeah.
How are you going to get to a draft by July 7th? It seems like the scope of your working group is a little broader than Working Group 3.
It is, yes. I don't disagree with that. I don't know that, frankly, that we're going to have draft language for Part 3 by July, other than the outline itself. We may be able to complete parts of the implementation analysis, for example, as we go. But proposals for alternative systems, we may be able to document existing systems as alternatives. We will be able to plug in some of the information we collect during our parts 1 and 2 conversations, but the actual details for Part 3, I think, is probably a July to August, is most of the month of July.
That's cutting it a little close.
Well, yes. If you have a phone number I can call to ask for more time, I'll make that call.
I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't think so either. So, again, if there are better work plans.
Do you need more help? I mean, do you need more resources? What?
I would be a fool to say no. I think I'd like to start with our process and see how quickly it's going.
Right.
It's very clear what our time frame is. So if we should absolutely do some level checks. And the July meeting, if we are halfway done through Romanet number 3 in our outline by July, that's a big red flag, and we've got to drastically change things. I don't think that's where we'll be. I think we'll be well into the report by then.
So are both working groups just intending to do your 1 or 2 calls, weekly calls?
Yeah,
how are you going to do this?
Okay, since I've got the microphone, we've already talked about Bob Klein from Cablevision pointed out and suggested that a 1 to 1.5 day face-to-face. There was a lot of value in the Working Group 2's face-to-face session. A lot of information came in. There was a lot of conversation within the room, and even folks who were on the phone we're able to benefit from having the face-to-face conversations and participating to a lesser extent by that. So I do believe a face-to-face, at least one face-to-face meeting.
Between now and July?
Between now and July, yes. I've taken an action item to set up a poll looking for a time that's convenient to everybody. The place where the Workgroup 2 meeting happened in Colorado Cable Labs, I understand should be available with some, advance notice, so we'll try and work that. We'll also, Sony had mentioned their San Diego offices would be a possibility there on the West Coast, which is great for folks from the Middle Country or the West Coast, but folks who have to travel from the East Coast are
not so good.
Are not so happy. So, the Colorado may be. Go ahead, Sony.
Yeah, Sony's willing to host our face-to-face for Working Group 4.
Yeah.
I got that confirmed.
Okay, great. So again, it's an option. It may turn out there's another industry event that lots of people will be traveling at somewhere in this time frame. We might ride on the coattails of something. I honestly haven't checked. We also heard from Amazon they may have some issues with traveling to, for example, Colorado, which I'd like to understand, and if we can find a solution, maybe we can handle that, or maybe Amazon will be willing to work remotely for that. I'm not sure exactly what those details are. So, again, that poll should be coming out tomorrow, and we'll gather that. And then I think.
Yeah. So this is Adam. There we go. Bruce and I at least have talked about having a face-to-face to hear from folks about the different systems that we want to evaluate. I think that the conclusion was, a couple hours on the phone a couple of times a week would go very old very quickly and take up a lot of time. So we're going to discuss it in our Working Group 3 breakout this afternoon or whenever it comes today, and talk about when and maybe where. But I think that at least for Working Group 3, the sooner the better. We need to give folks a little bit of opportunity notice to what what we want to hear from people. But I think that a lot of what we need to do depends on gathering that information as quickly as possible. So we'll try to get that done as fast as we can. Yeah.
And somebody has to write this. Are you confident you're going to get sufficient volunteers to put pen to paper?
To write the Working Group 3 report?
Yeah.
I think that we probably will be able to get it written. There's I think that we're likely to have folks with strong opinions, but that's plenty of people willing to write, but lots of people willing to criticize what's written. So I think that we'll likely be all right in terms of manpower writing words.
Okay. All right, John.
Actually, Cheryl, in terms of time frame, my analysis of because we are looking for salient differences, there's a bit more analysis in kind of our first. I believe we kind of need to do our first one of kind of each of these sections as a group, decide, yes, we are looking at the right level. We don't care about bits and bytes, maybe, and we don't care about what color cases come in, probably. We care about something in between in terms of the salient differences for devices or for technologies or for use cases. So unlike Workgroup 3, who needs to get, as Adam said, they need to meet as soon as possible because they're relying on a lot of input from the outside. I think we in Workgroup 4 right now need to understand the questions we need to ask better before we ask everybody else to come in and tell us what's important, because we kind of don't know enough right now to know what might be important. I think we'll develop that very quickly, and my hope is that by looking at, for example, set-top boxes, one use case for subscriber usage and what's in Working Group 2, that quick analysis of those three items, we can then, for example, tell Joe Weber from TiVo, hey, here's what we know about set-top boxes that's important. If you can tell us all of the things that are the same on your system and anything else that's different that's in the right scope, please do so. And that way I think we can be more efficient in bringing in these outside experts. As it is today, we could get 40 pages on each of these devices and be stuck with hundreds of pages of text to glean through, and that doesn't seem to be a valuable way to start. So I think we're in a little bit different work path than Work Group 3 at this point. We'll talk about this on Monday for sure, and maybe by then folks will have some crystallized ideas of how we might move forward and proceed. And certainly if other DSTAC members have other ideas on better ways to analyze this, or they can point at existing documents or analyses, that'd be great. We're willing to copy and crib from the best with full attribution, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other, did I hear somebody on the phone? No?
Yeah, hi, this is Brant. So I would characterize what John said as being correct. I think we're going to work on part 1, and then really our task is to try to flesh out part 2 and part 3. And so this is kind of basically a question to the entire DSTAC. If there's, for part 2, there's standards, protocols, and information that would enable competitive availability of devices. That's part 2. For part 2, we had identified a technology called SAT-IP, and John mentioned cable card, but we're actually, the other sections are question marks. So this is to the entire group. And in part 3, we're trying to identify alternative systems. And we've already identified possibly RVU with extensions, VidiPath with extensions, possibly. And so there's other systems that potentially could be identified. So this is a question, again, to the entire DSTAC with what they would like to see, described there. Yeah. So yeah, I think we're likely though to identify items in part 1, which will help us with those other parts. But I think people may already know certain issues and or certain technologies that we should put there.
Okay, Bob, did you have a comment?
I just had a question. How's the FCC envision getting from our August 4th report to the final report?
So that's something we're still kind of figuring out. We'll probably appoint some co-editors for the final report to work with both of the working groups to merge everything together into a final report.
Thank you.
John?
So I think at least Work Group 4, we will call out the parts of Work Group 2 that were their report that we're relying on. There may be other parts of Work Group 2's report and Work Group 1's report that ought to also end up in the final report too. So when it comes time to write that final report, hopefully you'll be looking at all 4 outputs or all 4 inputs coming in, and I suspect there may be some more than just the glue words that put all these bits together. There may be some new analysis required as well. So should we look at getting apartments in the D.C. area for the month of August?
I'm hoping that there will be some sort of cloud document.
Time to come visit this
Vacancy should be quite good this time of year, that time of year as well. But I think we can do this virtually. I don't think we have to be in Washington to edit. I hope not.
Yeah, no, you're right. Okay, anything else to discuss? Are the groups going to meet afterwards? Yeah. Okay.
So
and
two points on that.
Just a minute. Okay.
Another, I guess, sort of process. So we all submitted outlines. What was your thoughts on how you're going to finalize the outline for the final report?
That's really a content question. So I'm
sort of you figured
Yeah,
that out,
open
yeah.
more to the DStack as long as you believe it fits within the
Yeah, I was just curious because didn't we submit, I mean, how many did you get? I don't remember.
We got 2, and they're both up on the website, so they're easily accessible.
Okay. And was there an idea at some point we're just going to try and merge those and turn them into one, or that's what I was asking about the process for that? Because when we get to August 4th, we'll probably want to have that work done so we can leverage it.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone had input on those, I'd get a little iffy on us getting into the content of the report. So if folks wanted to have any input discussion on the said outlines right now, feel free to discuss those.
Yeah, it's good input. Maybe, I mean, I'll think about that, and maybe it's just a matter of a couple people sitting down, and voila, we've got a final outline. So, combined. So.
Yeah, I'm hoping after the 2 reports are done that it'll be more or less obvious. We'll see. I neglected to mention at the start of the meeting that there are 2 technical displays in the library. Dish or DirecTV, I guess, has one, right? And TiVo has one. So feel free to go take a look. Yeah. Is there anything else that we need the public?
Yes, public comment. So we have a microphone available over here.
Brent, can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So there was a couple of people that joined the Working Group 3 calls. I assume Working Group 4 as well. I forget who their names were from.
It was the internet security folks.
Oh.
Is there more color on who they are and what they're doing?
So I believe Mike is here, Mike Saberstein. Oh, no, maybe he got up and left. They're just interested so they're on the CISRC 4, or I guess were on the CISRC 4. They're interested in cybersecurity and how cybersecurity can play into this issue. Really more of a fact-gathering mission than a, adding input type mission. But I'm sure they'd love to meet everyone. If anyone wants to be introduced to them, I'll be happy to exchange information.
John?
So what have they taken a look at the Work Group 1 and Work Group 2 reports? That would be two obvious documents, as well as the other documents the work groups produced.
I've definitely sent those to them.
Okay.
I don't know if they fit into their day-to-day, but...
Okay.
Okay.
Ross from Beyond Broadband Technology. I also have the probably unique experience of chairing a former technical advisory committee on cable television and many of these questions. And I think that one of the things that has to be noted at this point, as many of you have sort of said, is that the time frame for this is probably impossible. And the suggestion from the chair that it's likely that there won't be any extension potentially suggests that the work that's being done is of questionable value, because you're going to cut everything short before any real technical work can be done. And I think that's something that you have to look at. I would point out that the chair mentioned this morning that this report had to be submitted to Congress in September. It doesn't. It's to the Commission. So if the Commission says we can't really do this within this time frame, it would seem to make sense. But one of the problems that has occurred is that instead of narrowing the scope to a level that could actually maybe be accomplished, the staff has now broadened the scope to double the size of the questions that are being asked of the committee to answer. And I just wonder whether that makes any sense. I mean, the scope of the DISTAC report document that the staff issued at the end of last month quoted the Stella Reauthorization Act And it said, recommend performance objectives, technical capabilities, and technical standards of a downloadable security system to promote the competitive availability. It could have said standards for unique user interfaces. It could have said standards for search functions. It could have said standards for the ability to record programming. It could have said a lot of things. It didn't. It said standards for downloadable security. And I have been here at each meeting. I have said this repeatedly at each meeting. If you really want to meet the schedule that you're talking about and stay within the mandate of this group, it seems to me that you stick with standards for downloadable security. And if there are then issues, legitimate issues, on whether there should be how you do user interfaces or how you do a recording or how you disintermediate the product or whether you should do that, all of those are great policy questions, but they're not policy questions for people who are supposed to be experts on downloadable security. And if you instead of broadening your scope, narrowed the scope to what was actually said in the Reauthorization Act, you might, although I doubt it, be able to reach a consensus on real technical standards by September 4th. But I think one of the suggestions that I would make to this committee is that they honestly go back to the Commission and, if necessary, Congress, and say, in this time frame, you can't reasonably establish technical standards for these things. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, so we can adjourn.
We're adjourned.
Okay, the meeting's adjourned.
Brendan, there are rooms for us, is there?
Yes, although because we ended so early, I may need to email our conference room folks and see if we can get a different room. But I'll keep an eye on that. I'll also escort anyone who is interested in the tech demos down to the library. We can accommodate 15 in that room, from what I understand, so we may have to do it in shifts.
Should we have a little chat?